Kind of a funny thing. So yesterday, there's a large pool. Finally, Yvonne gets all set up for the kids. Today it's pouring rain. Deluge, I should say. So when I got up and I heard that, I told her, "Good job making it rain." So yeah, any forest fires that get put out today, it's because we put a pool in the backyard. That's a rule, and as a rule, it's been a rule around here for as long as I can remember. That when I was a kid, we'd have our pool, and if we set it up, rain the next day. Okay, I'm glad to see those things don't change over the years. So, top 10 players according to the Hockey News after the 2006-2007 season. So, this is all material grabbed from the 07-08 annual, which we see some shifts in terms of who's at the top and who's at the bottom. But when you look at the top 10 players, Sid the Kid's number 1, Alex Ovechkin's number 2, Roberto Luongo's number 3, Nick Lidstrom's number 4, Chris Pronger's number 5, Jarome Iginla's number 6, Vinny Lecavalier's number 7, Joe Thornton's number 8, Danny Heatley's number 9, and Marty Brodeur's number 10. So, the top 10 overall, the biggest jump is Luongo up to number 3. Luongo had an amazing year. Of course, he was on a Canucks team that really shouldn't have been in the playoffs, but he got in there. But we'll get there. Interesting note. I think there's still only one Miller brother that has a cup ring, and it's not Kelly, it's not Kip, and it's not Ryan. It's Drew Miller. So Drew Miller, the one Miller brother, who I think had the shortest career as well out of all the Millers, it'd be between him and Kip. Yeah, he got a cup ring that year with the Anaheim Ducks, who finished with 110 points. And Teemu Selanne drank from the fountain of youth, 46 goals, 46 assists, or 92 points for him. So it was 46, 46, 92. Let me go ahead and fix that. So, great year for him. Jean-Sebastien Giguère's their starter. Everything's great for Anaheim. And this is their one Stanley Cup. It helped that they had Niedermayer and Pronger on the point, just a little bit. The Atlanta Thrashers, this is the one year that Atlanta saw playoff hockey, and they didn't see much of it. They saw 4 games. 2 on TV and 2 at their home arena, because they were out in 4 against the New York Rangers in round 1. So they had 97 points, which was the highest the team ever got points-wise. Great finish. They went out and they rented a couple of players at the deadline to really go for it, and it fell apart. So they're swept by the New York Rangers, and that's as close as they're going to get. Boston, 76 points. This team is miserably bad. And no playoffs, of course. And attendance is down. So when people talk about, attendance is bad in that city, you don't see that in the traditional hockey communities. People like to forget that when teams are bad, fans will vote with their pocketbooks and stay away. So when you see comments about just how bad some of the attendance is, I also, while I will make mention of it, I will also point and go, yeah, but what kind of team do they have on the ice? 96 points for Mark Savard that year. He's just absolutely an amazing talent who sadly had a shorter career than he should have. Buffalo, 113 points. They made it all the way to the third round. They were out in the conference final when they played against the Ottawa Senators. And Daniel Briere, 95 points. Not bad for a guy that they got for very, very little from the Arizona Coyotes. Briere, one of those key guys, and of course, at some point, Buffalo's going to go, we like to make money, and Briere's going to have to go. But at this stage, things are going really well, and that's one of the best point totals Buffalo ever had. I'm trying to think if it's the absolute best. I think it was, but it's close if it's not. Calgary, 96 points. They're out in round 1 against Detroit. So Kiprusoff's still solid. Iginla's still leading them in points, of course. And Irving is listed as the goalie of the future. It's one of those ones that stands out to me because I thought Irving was going to be a good goaltender at the NHL level. I really did. I thought, you know what, this Irving kid, this is going to be fine. Kiprusoff gets older, he ends up moving out, and Irving's going to be their starter. Let's go Leland, and then it just never worked out. Carolina, 88 points for them, and no playoffs. Remember now, they won the Cup in 06, so they missed the playoffs altogether in 07. This is just sort of a thing to mention to certain St. Louis fans that are quite upset at the idea that people say, well, they may not be as good next year, they may not be as motivated. We've seen it before. We've seen it before where a team wins the Stanley Cup and looks great, and then a year later, they miss the playoffs altogether. 13th in goals per game. They're 21st in goals against average. So what happens is, and it's not all on Cam Ward, but Cam Ward is not the same in the regular season for 06-07 that he'd been in the 2006 playoffs, and their overall defense isn't great. So they just end up being kind of middle of the road, 88 points, and miss the playoffs. Chicago, 71 points. But Kane and Taves are on the way. They're listed as the number 1 and number 2 prospects. This, of course, was the year where Kane ends up being drafted first overall. And Havlat leads the team with 57 points. So 57 points leading the team tells you just how bad it is for Chicago. And it's not anything bad about Havlat. It's just he's not really supposed to be your number 1 scorer. Colorado, 95 points and no playoffs. So they're 1 point out of the playoffs. Just barely eked out by the Calgary Flames. They had a 15-2-2 run at the end of the year, so they were close. 100 points for Joe Sakic. Sakic had a fantastic season, showing no signs of aging or breaking down at this stage. But again, that 15-2-2 run gives you a feeling of, hey, Colorado should be in it next year. There's been some fool's gold with Colorado over the years. You get the feeling that where they are right now, as I'm recording this, they may finally be on the path towards being a contender again. But over the years in between their last Stanley Cup in 01 and now, we've seen times where they look pretty good and it looks like they're getting it going, and then very often the rug gets pulled out from under them. Whether it's injuries, trades, free agency, or just bad luck, the rug gets pulled out from under them. Columbus, 73 points. Of course, no playoffs. There's no indication that they're going to make the playoffs in 08 either, when Mason's going to come in. Frederick Norrena is their starter. He's okay, but he's not great. And they need a goaltender that's going to be really great and steal some games. And they have no idea they're going to get that as soon as the following year. David Vaborny leads the team in points with 64. So Vaborny had a nice, solid run for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Coming in as a guy out of Europe that nobody really knew very much about. So this is one of those instances where a veteran player will come over from Europe and excel in the National Hockey League. It's a hit and miss kind of thing, but in this case it worked really well for Columbus. Dallas, 107 points, but they lost in the first round against Vancouver. That was an incredible first round series, and of course there was the marathon game in that series that kept me up until, I want to say it was 12:30 at night. Might have been about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I had to work the next day. But Vancouver wins it, and it's just this great game. They're 21st in goals per game, 3rd in goals against average. Mike Ribeiro leads the team in points with 59. And do you know what the number one conversation starter was coming out of there with the Dallas Stars? We don't think Marty Turco's good enough to win a series. Are you bloody kidding me? They're 21st in goals out of 30 teams, and their leading scorer is Mike Ribeiro. But yeah, let's go ahead and say Turco's the problem. I kept hearing it, and I kept saying no. And Turco's numbers against Vancouver in round 1 that year were fantastic. But people just looked and went, he couldn't win a round again. Well, guy sucks. Yeah, it's too bad he can't go down and score goals. Number 3 in goals against average in the entire National Hockey League, but I never understood how it was Turco's fault. All right. Detroit, 113 points. They're out in the 3rd round against Anaheim. So, 2 teams with 113 points. They both lose in the conference finals. Hasek ends up having an amazing amazing run. 38 wins, 2.05 goals against average, and a save percentage of .913. So for a guy who was retired and then he was having all kinds of injury problems and he couldn't stay in the lineup for a couple of years, this was a great comeback for Hasek. And for Detroit, it shows they're not done yet as contenders. Oilers, 71 points. So they went to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2006, and in 2007 for an encore, they don't make the playoffs. They're 30th in goals per game. Their biggest problem is just they can't score. So while Dwayne Rollison's a solid goaltender, their offense just isn't there. And their leading scorers prove it. It's Sikora and Hemsky, who both had 53 points. That's not good enough. 53-point leading scorer, just not going to get it done. Florida, 86 points for them. No playoffs. Olli Jokinen has 91 points. And so Jokinen has a great season. And he's far and away their best player. But they want to shore up the goaltending, so they go out and get Thomas Vokoun in the offseason. And they're still trying. They're trying to get back what they lost when they traded Luongo the year before, because Alex Auld is a flop. 68 points for the LA Kings. No playoffs. Their penalty kill is the worst in the league, 77.9%, which is amazing, because when the Kings become champions, not very many years away from that, their penalty kill is their strength. Their leading scorer is Mike Camilleri with 80 points. So, not that long ago, Mike Camilleri leading a team in scoring with 80 points. Minnesota, 104 points. So, solid season. They were out in round one against the Anaheim Ducks. First in goals against average. So, this again, Minnesota being the best defensively in the National Hockey League. Offense, Ralston and Dimitra tied for the lead on the team with 64 points. So again, not point per game, but it's better than 59 points with Ribeiro, and you got two of them with 64. Montreal, 90 points, no playoffs, but their power play was first in the league that year at 22.8%. So Montreal's power play this past season was kind of not great. So maybe talk to some of the guys who got that power play to 22.8% that year. Might be a good idea. Saku Koivu leads with 75 points. Koivu, kind of a legend at this point for the Montreal Canadiens. And I always appreciated that Saku Koivu, a guy who wasn't like a huge offensive star, did become so beloved in Montreal. That at this point in time, Koivu, a guy who back in the 80s, I don't know how long he would have lasted in Montreal. He did become a beloved figure in Montreal in the mid-2000s. So, nice. Nashville, 110 points. They were out in round one versus San Jose. So those 110 points, they finished third overall behind Detroit and Buffalo, but they were out in round one. And they brought in Forsberg as a rental at the deadline. It didn't work out. And Correa also makes his exit. Correa had been the leading scorer with 76 points. So Nashville gets close. You get the feeling they're a contender. And then their two big names up front leave the team in the offseason. So that leaves you kind of thinking, well, it's up to Barry Trotz to keep him respectable. And he would. But, yeah, it was quite the run there. And sadly, Forsberg didn't have the effect of pushing them over the top as expected. When they were eliminated in the first round by San Jose, it was kind of a shocker, because Nashville had bulked up at the deadline and had made themselves a better team. New Jersey, 107 points. They lost in round two against the Ottawa Senators that year. Eliash is their leading scorer with 69 points, and Marty Brodeur would set an NHL record, which stands to this day as with 48 wins. I don't think that record ever gets challenged. We see fewer goaltenders playing as many games as we used to see. And just 48 wins is a huge number. So, I don't see any reason why that number will ever get challenged. Islanders, 92 points, and they were out in the first round against Buffalo. Yes, they make the playoffs. Montreal misses by 2 points. So, again, some of these storylines you can see out of this season are kind of mirrored in the one we just finished. But 92 points out in round one against Buffalo. Ryan Smith was rented for the playoffs that year, and it just didn't work out. So he had his crying session when the Oilers got rid of him, and he didn't last there either. And it's notable that Blake, who would go on to be kind of thrown under the bus in Toronto, he had 40 goals and 69 points that year. That was one of the best seasons that he had. So, Jason Blake, good player, who had kind of a slow end to his career, it seemed at the time. Anyways, 40 goals for him, 69 points overall. The 40 goals is impressive. The Rangers, 94 points, and they were out in round two against Buffalo. Yager had 96 points that year for the Rangers, and pretty quick after this, of course, he'll end up going over to Europe. If Yager doesn't go over to Europe, if he ends up playing his entire career in the National Hockey League, he would have well over 2,000 points in his career. Although, you could also counter-argue that by playing in the European League, maybe he was able to stay fresher and was able to avoid some of the punishment he might have taken if he'd stayed in the National Hockey League. Maybe he wouldn't have played till he was as old as he was when he finally retired from the NHL. Just one of those things. Ottawa, 105 points, and they lose in the finals. So they're 8 points back of number one overall. They're behind teams like New Jersey and Buffalo, and yet they knock both of them out, proving a point that I've made that I think Ottawa's better off as the underdog. Doesn't really matter in the finals, however. Interestingly enough, they have 24 wins and 6 losses in any game decided by 3 or more goals. This team can score, and Heatley leads them, 50 goals, 55 assists, 105 points. So Danny Heatley, was he a guy with a big ego? Yeah, probably. Did he earn that with the 50 goals and 105 points? Yeah, probably. Would that actually come back to kind of bite him in the, you know what? Yeah, a little bit, kind of, sort of. But at this point, he can do no wrong. The Senators can do no wrong. And they were in the Stanley Cup Finals and knocked out by Anaheim. The only thing was, you never got the feeling Anaheim was in any danger against Ottawa. That Ottawa was just overmatched. Again, when you have Niedermayer and Pronger, you can overmatch pretty much everybody. Philadelphia, 56 points, 30th overall. So they take a huge nosedive from the year before. And they'll take a massive climb as well the following season. It's the worst year this team had in 40 years, and Simon Gagne leads them in points with 68. But in the offseason, Holmgren will change things around. They did draft James Van Riemsdyk, 2nd overall, and things would get better for Philly pretty darn quick. So this is why I say that when people, shouldn't count Philadelphia out. Anytime they miss the playoffs, you can bank on them making the playoffs the next year. This is where that comes from. They had 56 points. They're 30th in the league. Nobody was taken to make the playoffs next year, and then they did. So, again, if they can come back from that disaster, I think they can come back from a slightly underachieving kind of season that they had in 2018-2019. Phoenix, 67 points, and they're 29th overall. So, bad year overall for them, and Shane Doan leads them in points with 55. And this is right in the middle of that run where you can say Shane Doan never once complained, never once said he wanted out, was a team guy right to the end. And when almost any other veteran player would say, man, this is great, you guys have compensated me well, but I want to go somewhere and have a chance to win something, Doan never complained. So nothing but mad respect for Doan on that level. And for Phoenix, they never quite gave him that team that could win. Pittsburgh, 105 points. They were out in round 1 versus the Ottawa Senators. This guy might have cheered pretty loud at Ottawa knocking out Pittsburgh. I'm just throwing that out there. But that being said, Crosby had 120 points. Crosby had an amazing season. And as much cheering as I might have done in 2007, yeah, that really petered out in 2008 and 2009. Because Pittsburgh is gearing up for a huge run. And that loss to the Senators in the first round, it's one of those you have to lose to learn how to win kind of things. So they take the lessons from that loss against Ottawa, and they fix themselves for the following season. San Jose has 107 points that year. They were out in round 2 versus Detroit. So San Jose firmly entrenched now as a contender and is one of the best teams in the league. And Joe Thornton, 114 points. So, no, he didn't follow up the huge season he had the year before with a season that was just as big, but it was still pretty good. 114 points is still a pretty good season, and so for San Jose, things look pretty darn bright. And Patrick Marleau is becoming a point-a-game player as well with Joe Thornton there. St. Louis, 81 points, no playoffs. Paul Kariya comes in and signs with them. Tkachuk also returns. Tkachuk was rented out to the Thrashers at the deadline and then went back. And there was an agreement that he knew he was going to go back to St. Louis before he went to Atlanta, which is why the NHL didn't like it. They didn't like that whole idea of a hired gun that knows he's going somewhere else at the end, so they tried to change things so that doesn't work. Doug Weight leads the team with points with 59. This is where Doug Weight's really not quite where he was years before. That's kind of how hockey works and how aging works. But he's still their leader with 59 points that season. So St. Louis coming out of where they were the worst, and they're getting better, and they're making the right moves to continue that narrative that will end with a 2019 Stanley Cup. They're not in that realm at this stage, and the moves they make now aren't quite the ones that'll lead to that. Tampa Bay, 93 points. They were out in round one against New Jersey, so they finished 3 points ahead of Montreal that year. The dividing line between in and out was really, really small. They were 1 point ahead of the Islanders. LeCavalier has 108 points. So Vinny LeCavalier, when he peaked pretty darn well. He would fall off of that, of course, the same as a lot of players do. But, man, when he was at his best. The biggest problem this team had was Mark Denis and Johan Holmquist were their goaltenders, and their numbers are abysmal. The goaltending was not good that year for Tampa. And you can get your way into the playoffs with goaltending that's not very good. You don't win a Stanley Cup without goaltending that's very good. Toronto, 91 points, no playoffs. So Toronto finishes 1 point out of the playoffs. This is where Toronto fans will say, oh, I remember that. There was a shootout, and there was I don't need to get into what happened or Wade Dublowicz and what he was able to do. But Toronto misses by 1 point, and this is a very frustrating era for Toronto fans because they just barely missed the play. They're almost there, and they're not there. So all everybody else remembers is, well, Toronto didn't make it. And what's forgotten is they're still not a bad team, and they're almost. There's a lot of almost going on there. And Andrew Raycroft played 74 games that year. So this is a year after he is traded from Boston. Boston, of course, is still a disaster. Raycroft wins a bunch of games and didn't look bad during the regular season. If he got in the playoffs, yeah. But during the regular season, he wasn't bad. And I know people are going to remember him as being awful. That first year, he wasn't bad. He was just overplayed. They had no faith in his backup whatsoever. And Sundin had 76 points that year to lead the team in points. So you'll notice the top 10 players. I don't think there's a single video I've done in this series that's had Sundin in the top 10. I think he was in the top 20 every year, though. Sundin had a very good career. Definitely above average star player. But he was never in that Crosby, Ovechkin type rarefied air. He was never able to be seen as better than Lidstrom or Pronger. Just a very, very good player. And when you look at the team that was around him a lot of the time in Toronto, it's amazing how many points he was able to put up. Vancouver, 105 points. They were out in round 2 against Anaheim. I was unpopular at work at that point because they knocked out Dallas, who I was so excited about that matchup between Dallas and Vancouver. And while the series itself was boring because there wasn't much scoring, I was on the edge of my seat as much as I could be. And then they go against Anaheim, and I'm like, okay, so that's Niedermayer and Pronger. They're out in 5. I was very unpopular. People are like, aren't you excited about the Canucks? And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad they got out of the first round, but we're dead now. And I was, what are you talking about? Yeah. So, and it was people that were the playoff fans. Every city has them. This isn't just a Vancouver thing. It's the fan that hasn't paid any attention at all during the regular season. And then as soon as the playoffs start, they're all excited. And if you watch a hockey game with a fan like that, you start wanting to punch yourself. Because you'll be watching the game and you get, who's that? That's Kevin Bieksa. Oh, is he any good? Yeah. Is that Luongo? That's that new goalie we got, right? Yeah, yeah, sure. And that's just when you want to punch things. If you've never watched a hockey game with a fan that just watches playoffs, doesn't watch the regular season, you have led a really good life. 86.9% penalty kill for Vancouver that year. They're first in the penalty kill. And who's your best penalty killer? Your goaltender. Luongo dragged this team to the playoffs. Daniel Sedin led the way with 84 points. So the Sedins are finally starting to show that point-a-game kind of potential. However, there's no offensive punch behind them at all. The offensive depth, it's not there. I remember coming out of that playoffs when there were people saying, well, Jan Bulis looked pretty good. And I'm like, that's faint praise. If Jan Bulis is one of your most dangerous players on the ice, you got a problem. And, so Luongo ended up with 47 wins that year, one behind the 48 posted by Brodeur. And so Brodeur ended up getting the Vezina that season. But Luongo, without him, Vancouver's just dead. Their defense was not very good. Luongo was fantastic. 70 points for the Capitals. No playoffs for them. Ovechkin, 46 goals, 46 assists, 92 points. Olaf Kolzig is still the starter, but he's starting to show his age. And it's becoming obvious that his time as a starter is winding down. The good news is Varlamov and Neuwirth are on the way. We haven't even got into Holtby yet. So this is where I get the whole thing about these guys just keep churning out goaltenders. Their backup that year was Brent Johnson. Johnson's numbers were not very good. So for Capitals fans, they at least knew they had Varlamov, who was a first-rounder coming up, and Neuwirth, who was putting up some pretty decent numbers at leagues below NHL level at that stage. So for the Capitals, things are going to get better. We don't have any indication of a future Cup champion, but at least this is an era where they're not losing to Pittsburgh in the first or second round. So you have that going for you if you're a Capitals fan at that stage. There are 35 points between them, between the Capitals and the Penguins, but they're going to be crossing paths again soon enough. But there you go. The 2006-2007 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.